everybody, Ty here. Hope everyone is doing well. So, doing a little bit of examining today because we have seen this pop up from the Storm Prediction Center. We have a couple days of slight risk here. This is the day 4 outlook that we're looking at now. And of course, the common denominator between the two is North Central and Central Texas are points of interest here. Maybe even parts, I would even go as far as to say that maybe day 4 is arguably like maybe West Central, but doesn't really matter here. From Abilene over towards maybe even Dallas, Fort Worth, and Waco, we have an area of interest for severe weather here. Now, as of right now, not thinking that there's going to be a big tornado threat with this, but I would be remiss to say that I wouldn't be watching this closely. Things tend to develop very quickly with wintry systems, as we have come to find out this year. But in any case, we're going to be talking about the severe weather threat today in this video. Of course, there's other factors as well. There's wintry weather, and we're going to be talking about that further down the line. But as far as this week's concerned, this is the main thing we're going to be focusing on starting out. Now, obviously, as you can see, I already have the Euro on the bottom left corner of the screen. We're going to just pull up the GFS to go along with it. We're going to make our models comparisons here and kind of get into the details as to what's expected to happen next. So we've been talking about this a good bit here. It's not really much of a surprise to be had. We've been talking about the potential for this area to be under the gun for severe weather. And large part of that is going to be due to this trough here, which is even bringing rain over towards Southern California and parts of the Southwest here. These areas haven't seen rain in a while, which is a good thing, but it's kind of a double-edged sword as well because they're going to see a decent amount of moisture all at once here. And with the soil being so dry, the fear is that the moisture will not, the soil will not be able to absorb said moisture. Having trouble speaking today. But the fear is that the soil will not be able to absorb the moisture here, and the threat of flash flooding and also debris flows from the wildfires will come into play here. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but odds are not in our favor, unfortunately. So we go further along. As this trough begins to move, it begins to deepen a bit and evolve. And you can see this little jet streak beginning to form here on the eastern side of it. So as we look forward here, this is going to be the catalyst behind our severe weather. Winds are going to increase across this region here. From this perspective here, it kind of looks more like a linear event more so than anything else, but isolated supercells will be possible ahead of the frontal boundary that's expected to form here. So we'll be keeping an extra close eye on this area. And there's going to be potential beyond the 2 days that we were showing here, but it seems like the trough itself does kind of weaken and kind of fizzle out by the time we get a little bit further into the southeast here. But I would go as far as to say Texas, Louisiana, maybe even Mississippi could get into the action here, of course. Other areas, of course, it's possible that we could get some pretty heavy rain here as well, especially towards Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and also even parts of maybe the Virginias as well before all is said and done. But as far as severe weather is concerned, we're kind of in the unknown as to what's expected to happen there. Like I said, I'm not really expecting a whole lot. Euro showing a pretty similar look from this point here too, although the Euro does look a little bit more robust with its troughing as well. See a much stronger trough here. Progression's pretty similar, but also with the trough being a little bit stronger, a little bit wider as well, maybe even on the verge of going into a neutral or negative tilt. Neutral tilt basically is where you kind of see the trough kind of sitting in almost a straight line here. We're still slightly in the positive here, but as this continues to move forward here, you start to see that negative tilt begin to come into play as we get into the 31st. So I'm kind of interested. Like I said, this is why I'm not necessarily ruling out Mississippi, maybe even Alabama before all is said and done here. But as you can see here, the two models at this point aren't in great agreement as we go forward here. The other thing is, with the way the Euro's outcome is concerned, areas a little further off to the east, we could still expect much more in the way of rain, but severe weather seems a little less likely. So, like I said, a lot of moving parts with this, and we're still trying to hash out the details as of right now. Once we get in range of the convective models, which will be about maybe 36 to 48 hours from now, I'll feel a little bit better about making a forecast. But at this point, it's a little too early to call, I would say. But in any case, though, as we go beyond that point for the rest of the week, severe weather starts to diminish at this point. By this point, also, we would be expecting a winter storm. We'll get into the details of that more tomorrow. But as you can see, we get towards the 7-day period here. This is 168 hours out. We're looking relatively calm, a little bit more in the way of action over towards the northwest of anything here. But as you can see here, it's a tale of two models. GFS is showing a little less in the way of activity over towards the far northeastern setup, whereas with the Euro, we're looking a little bit more aggressive there. But there seems to be a little bit more in the way of cold air in play with the GFS as well. So, like I said, a lot of moving parts with this forecast, with the this upcoming forecast, because we haven't even made one yet at this point. So, considering the fact that we're mainly looking at severe weather in this one, and keeping the video, I'm going to try to keep the video somewhat beefy, but not too long. But one area that we always look for when it comes to severe weather is towards the mid-levels of the atmosphere. This may look like the same map, but we're actually looking at a different level of the jet stream. We're looking in the mid-levels. This is 700 millibars, or I would say probably about 20,000 feet, maybe close to 25,000 that we're looking. We're looking in that range, so to speak. So the main thing that we're looking for at this point is we're of course looking at wind direction, but more importantly, we're also looking for what's called a short wave. And you see these little contour lines right here. What we're looking for are little ripples within these lines as this trough begins to progress here. The trough is not quite as evident, but you can actually, if you look closely, you can actually see where that trough is set up right here. I'm actually going to go back on the Euro here so I can show you just how these two kind of coincide with one another here. This is the trough at 500 millibars. This is at 7, and right here on that little flank, on that little southeastern flank, you see this little loop here beginning to occur. There's 700, and there's 500 right here. So with that, pretty good bit of congruency between the two models. And with that being said, I also see a little bit of troughing occurring with this one. Let's go back to this screen and keep things rolling. And right over here, you can see pretty prominent look at the shortwave as well. The greater the ripples within the contour line, the stronger the shortwave here. And the thing is, both of the models are kind of showing a pretty strong shortwave as we get into the 30th and into the 31st as well. So that's probably a big reason as to why the Storm Prediction Center has increased concern here, because the evidence is definitely there within the jet stream, to say the least. Now, as we go further along here, I think the 31st, as of right now, looks like it would be the bigger day. But the question is just where everything kind of sets up is still questionable at this point. Again, the progression between the two models is quite different. We have the GFS, which is a little bit further off towards the west, and the Euro's kind of having this thing race off to the east a bit more. So again, a little hard to tell, a little too early to call as to where the severe weather threat ends up setting up as of right now. But I would say anywhere between East Texas and maybe over towards Mississippi, Alabama could be a point of interest. Other factors are going to, of course, come into play, which may enhance or limit said severe risk. And of course, most critical factor when it comes to severe weather, or one of the more critical factors, is what's going on at the lower levels of the atmosphere. It's about 1,000 feet above our heads where we're looking right now at the jet stream. It's the low level jet, key factor when it comes to tornado genesis. And the thing is, with this environment that we have here, I definitely wouldn't rule out the chances of a few tornadoes. I think what the limiting factor as of right now might be is that the fact that this storm system might be progressing so fast and that we might not get the best kind of convection possible for supercells. Although they're possible, I do expect a mostly linear event at this point. As you can see here, there's pretty good agreement once we sneak over to the 30th here. Very strong low-level jet at this point. Progression, of course, is going to be the key out of these two models right now. Slight difference between the two, not very much, but in either case, though, low-level jet's pretty strong on the Euro. We got 58 knots here in the low-level jet. Threshold number is really about 30, but again, almost perpendicular looks at this time frame here. Now, as things continue to change here, low-level jet seems like it sets up right along where I would anticipate the frontal boundary to be. So cold front's going to pop up there by the time we get to about 126 hours out on the 31st here. But this is where things kind of get a little bit different, whereas the trough begins to race off a little bit more to the east with the Euro, whereas the GFS is kind of lagging back a little bit. Depending on how these depending on whether or not these two scenarios come into play, will determine a lot here. I think with the GFS scenario, it might have an increased severe weather threat due to the fact that we might be able to get a little bit more in the way of moisture in. Whereas with this scenario here, we'll still have moisture, but maybe not as abundant here. But it all depends on the moisture return that we get to start out with here. And we're about to get into that right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to change things up a bit here. We're going to do our comparison between the temperature map and the moisture return that we're anticipating to go along with it. The main thing that you would be looking for in the bottom left corner of the screen here is this little area right here in the blue. These are 60-degree dew points. And then over here, of course, we're going to see how the temperatures coincide along with this. So we'll move the temperature map first here. These little warmer colors, of course, are going to indicate warmer temperatures as we get into the 60 to 70 degree range. That's where the area of concern really starts to come into play here. So as you can see, this is our point of interest here. It's towards East Texas. And then we're going to move this up to the afternoon of the 30th here. This is right where we're supposed to be. And you can see that we have widespread dew points towards the mid 60s over towards East Central Texas by this point here. And then, of course, as we go further and further along here, you can see that this warm sector is going to move off to the east here, the GFS. We're going to compare the Euro in a second as well to go along with this. But as you can see, solid moisture return for the deep south here. Really, a lot of it's going to depend on what happens kinematically or with the jet stream as we saw earlier. Kinematics are basically the winds that we're going to be looking at, that we're going to be working with here. What we're looking at is what's called more the thermodynamics. This is the temperature, the dew points, instability, that kind of stuff here. But as you can see, we have still a pretty prominent warm and moist sector with this as we get into the 1st of February here to go with this. Now, here's the thing, and this is where things kind of get a little bit interesting here. The Euro scenario looks a lot more aggressive. So we'll move the moisture into place early here in this case. We're kind of hanging around the same area by this juncture. But what I'm paying attention to the most here, we have just as prominent of a moist sector as we did with the GFS. But the temperature contrast here is a little bit interesting. I do think with this setup here, we also have a little bit more in the way of an earlier initiation to go with it. So this could either help or hurt the storms in a way. But as you can see, we still have those 70-degree temperatures, 60, nearly 70-degree dew points. And I think that this setup would be a little bit more ideal for tornadoes if we can get prefrontal cells to emerge here. I do think convection might come into play with this storm system's forcing. Might be a little bit on the weaker side with that there. I think with the stronger forcing might come into play here, which would allow for less discrete cells, I would say. The weaker the forcing, storms are less likely to fire, but if they can fire and really kind of root into the atmosphere, so to speak, then there could be some problems here. But again, it's kind of hard to tell at this point just what the outcome would be with this. So go further along here. That moist sector does persist a little bit further along here to the east as a result, and the warm sector is going to be right there along with it. You can even see some of these areas. There could even be some record highs over here towards maybe even parts of southern Alabama, southern Georgia here, where we could have a point of interest here for severe weather. Again, it really just depends on how that trough progresses. And as we saw earlier with the Euro, the trough doesn't really look like it holds up as well, or doesn't hold together as well by this point. So a lot of questions to be had with this. Of course, after this point, we're not really too concerned about severe weather, whereas things begin to kind of taper off a bit here. So one other thing that we're going to look at here before we get to what the precipitation models look like at this point is our instability. And the thing that we're going to be paying attention to most is watching this little target area that kind of pops up over here towards Texas. There's two types of instability that we're looking at in this one. We're looking at the mixed layer CAPE, which is CAPE at all levels of the atmosphere. And you kind of see something pop up over here towards the 30th. It's actually kind of shifted a little bit more towards South Texas, whereas before we were kind of thinking towards West and Central Texas. This model's a little bit fresh here, so feel free to give the Storm Prediction Center time to adjust here. I think that there will be a change by tomorrow morning in regards to where their area of interest is. But one thing that we can make note of here is starting to see a lot more instability available towards this region here. And with the jet stream and the kinematics looking the way that they do, I'm thinking maybe a little further to the south of Dallas could be a point of interest as we go throughout the day on the 30th. So go towards the 31st here. Look at what happens with the euro. The instability just isn't really there. I think that in large part is due to that trough kind of breaking apart a little bit and kind of decaying as we go further along here. Now, there's still a chance that we could end up getting severe weather with this, but likelihood seems to be a little bit less. Now, with the GFS here, we're actually looking at surface cape, so we're mainly just looking at cape entirely at the surface level of the atmosphere. And it's showing a pretty similar look right now. I usually don't like looking at the global models in regards to looking at instability, mainly due to the fact that sometimes they can be a bit inaccurate, and then on top of that, looking at it hour to hour is much more important than looking at it in 3-hour intervals because, well, at any point in between that 3-hour period, we could see a little spike or drop in instability, and that could make all the difference in the forecast. So that being said, really not going to get a good idea of what's expected here until we get a good look at the convective models, which again is about another 36 to 48 hours out. But in any case, though, from the looks of it right now, definitely thinking, at least for now, Texas is going to be a point of interest. Still questioning what we have over here towards the Ozarks and maybe even towards Mississippi and Alabama. Kinematics seem like they could be in play depending on which model you're looking at. But overall, I think large-scale ascent, aka lift, and instability are going to be limiting factors from that point and beyond here. So, of course, final look will be at the precip maps. And, of course, we're going to start out with the Euro here. Mainly thinking at this point we're going to be dealing with a linear threat. In fact, there's our line of storms here. Could be a couple of prefrontal supercells involved with this as well. Make our comparison with the GFS. Kind of has a much messier convective mode with this. But in any case, though, it does look like we are going to have predominantly a linear mode at this point. Again, I do have my concerns for prefrontal cells as we go into the 31st and beyond here, but eventually this all kind of consolidates into a line that's going to be right along a cold front here. And with that, I do think the severe weather threat kind of drops off from that point, and then we're done after that for the rest of the week. And then, of course, we're going to be shifting a lot of our attention back towards winter weather, going much further beyond that point. Well, that's all I got for you guys in this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you know what to do. Make sure you smash that like button, hit that subscribe button. Also, make sure you get that notification bell on for future updates, because there will be more on the way here. Until then, you guys have an awesome rest of your Sunday, and I'll see you in the next one.